Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Swanberg, and I am the founder of Canadian Fertility Consulting and Egg Helpers. On today's webinar, I will be discussing choosing partners for your journey. And when I started thinking about this webinar, I really wanted to not only include Canadian options, but also to look at options outside of Canada, whether you are a Canadian or whether you are someone living abroad who is considering building their family through surrogacy and egg donation somewhere in the world. And so, the first and most important provider I believe anyone should look at choosing is the legal professionals that are going to help them along the way. And when I talk about legal professionals, I'm not only talking about the legal professional in the jurisdiction where you're going to be proceeding with surrogacy. So, if you live outside of Canada and are going to be proceeding in Canada, please don't just look at a Canadian lawyer, although that is going to be one of the providers that I will cover as well. But first and foremost, choosing a lawyer where you live. So, for our Canadian clients, please find a Canadian lawyer for surrogacy if you're proceeding here. And if you're proceeding abroad, ensure that you have an immigration lawyer in Canada that you have spoken to and really understand how you'll get this baby home, because it's great to have a baby somewhere, but if you can't bring them home with you, it's not going to matter. And that would be my advice for those outside of Canada who are going to proceed in Canada or outside of Canada. The questions to ask your lawyer are: does the law in the place I'm going to proceed for surrogacy match up with the laws where I live? So, for many people, especially in the EU, it's important that they have a known donor or a traceable donor, as well as in Australia and many other places. And so, as you're looking at an egg donor in those places, whether it's Canada or elsewhere, making sure that the lawyer you're working with in your jurisdiction vets the egg donor agreement, vets your surrogacy agreement, and is comfortable with the language. And as you're talking to providers in various countries, making sure that they understand that's going to happen. And it's going to happen because it's that important to you in terms of getting parentage at home. And so, as you're talking to providers, letting them know, I'm working with a lawyer in my jurisdiction, and I will need a lawyer in your jurisdiction who can communicate with that lawyer to ensure that, there are line items in your contract around full disclosure of identity if needed for your egg donor, as well as whatever is going to be required of your surrogate. And so, an example of that would be in the UK. We've worked with hundreds of people in the UK over the years, and we now know as an agency what the UK lawyers will need in order to apply for parentage, what the receipts in an altruistic location need to, or the way in which receipts need to be presented. And so, really ensuring that your lawyer and the lawyer where you're proceeding have had an extensive conversation prior to you engaging in that location. And so, as you're doing that, I think I don't know, we do at CFC and Egg Helpers, we have a list of lawyers all over the world that we've worked with extensively. And we have that list because we want to make sure that, if you haven't found someone where you are, you've been nervous because the laws where you are aren't surrogacy or egg donor friendly, and you just, you don't want to talk to a lawyer who may not understand what you're going through. Any reputable agency will have, referrals for lawyers in those places, and will be able to direct you. As well as you are, as we're talking about the legal process, finding a lawyer. I'm going to use Canada as an example. If you're outside of Canada, or even if you're inside of Canada, when you connect with a lawyer, asking some really important, pointed questions. Have you done surrogacy before? Because often we find intended parents going to their family lawyer or a lawyer that they know from their regular life. And my suggestion is always make sure that the person you're working with is a surrogacy lawyer. There are too many nuances, and we want to make sure that all parties have independent legal advice. And so, wherever you're proceeding, if you're a Canadian, your surrogate having independent legal advice is likely important to you. And so, take yourself with you and tell that agency that you're working with, look, my surrogate in Ukraine, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Argentina, I want them to have a lawyer. I want them to be very aware of what's in the legal contract, and I want them to have access to legal support throughout the process. And so, as you are talking to a lawyer, have they done surrogacy before? How many contracts have they done? Can they give you examples of where relationships have broken down or where you've had to involve them again? Do they work with other lawyers in Canada for your surrogate? Because your surrogate is going to need to have a different lawyer than you do. And so those questions are really important. And one question that I would never miss is, what are your fees? What are your fees to draft the contract? And if your surrogate delivers in the same province that that lawyer is in, what is the cost for you? Like, what is the cost for me to become a parent after? And the legal fees are not somewhere to cut corners. And this is a templated contract that has not really changed much in 20 years. And so you want to make sure that you talk to more than one lawyer. I always say talk to 3 lawyers and choose based on fit, choose based on, how they have explained when something's gone wrong, how they've been involved. Choose on their diversity and equity platform. Are they comfortable working with same-sex couples? Are they comfortable working with BIPOC community, if that applies to yourself or your surrogate? And what is the cost? Are they comparable? And as you're talking to lawyers about cost, asking them when this money is paid. Do you need to retain them and pay them, well before you have a surrogate? Can you pay them, as they're drafting or right before they draft? Because you may speak to this lawyer and not find a surrogate for 6 months, 9 months, a year, and having that money sit there may not make sense to you. And as you are looking at the legal process, knowing that not only is it a lawyer for your surrogacy agreement, a lawyer for your surrogate, but if you're proceeding in Canada, it's also a lawyer to draft a will for your surrogate. And so many people ask us why. Well, we don't need a will. Why are we putting a will in place for our surrogate? Why does our surrogate need life insurance? Well, the will is there so that if the surrogate were to die during pregnancy, you're named as the parents. If the child she's carrying survives, it's assumed to be her child. And so having a will that references the surrogacy agreement is so important. Second to that, having life insurance in place for your surrogate that is contemplated in that will is also important to ensure that the first $100,000 from that life insurance, if you're proceeding in Canada, goes to you as the intended parents to recoup the money that you've spent, likely, and the remaining amount goes to the surrogate, to her family. And why it's important to sort of have that conversation with your lawyer is because any lawyer in Canada will really understand what that's about. And the will, again, is likely a different lawyer. So you've got your lawyer, Your surrogate is going to be needing a lawyer as well. And, it can't be the same person. So, finding out from your agency, finding out from your surrogate what her plans are around a lawyer. Agencies typically will make recommendations to surrogates, but again, it is always up to the person being represented by that lawyer of who their lawyer will be. If you have an egg donor and a surrogate, it's important that you as intended parents have a contract and your surrogate has a lawyer to review that with her around the egg donor piece as well. And if you are in a country where a known egg donor or traceability is required, it's so important that that is contemplated in the legal agreement as well, because that will form part of your surrogacy agreement, which will form your post-birth documentation once you travel home. I hope I've covered all of the lawyer pieces. If anyone has any questions, please pop them in the comment section, the chat section there, and I'll be happy to answer them. So you have a lawyer, you know where you're going with that. Next is the egg donor agency. So many people are finding egg donors on Facebook, on Instagram, independent egg donors. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's really lovely, especially if you will have a known or traceable donor. And so there isn't a service provider per se, but the donor becomes that service provider. So having tough conversations with the donor right off the bat around being known, around traceability, around having a legal agreement in place, around the legislation where you live. So if you're in Canada and you're working with a Canadian donor, really getting clear that you can't pay her other than expenses, and that she has receipts for those expenses, and in some cases finding a lawyer to hold those funds. In other cases, having the surrogate provide the receipts to you, having the egg donor provide the receipts to you, and you paying those expenses on her behalf. So if you are interviewing an egg donor program, really ensuring that they know what your criteria are around an egg donor, that you understand what your fertility clinic's requirements are for an egg donor, and the donor agency has worked with your lawyer before, with your clinic before. It will make it so much easier to manage the process. And so I always say, go with the donor that you like, and hopefully it's an agency that you like, but really the donor is the priority. And so, you are likely scouring donor agency databases to look for the right donor. And so once you find that donor, questions to ask the agency, or some people ask the agency first before they even look, because they want to make sure, do you require us to have a legal contract? Do you have the donors on your database vetted already? Have they been screened, and are they approved by my clinic? And if you're working with a clinic that is outside of that agency's network, before you pay for the donor, the agency fee or the donor's expenses, making sure that that donor's information can be sent to your clinic. Or in some cases, it may mean you as intended parents switching clinics if the donor has a clinic preference or clinic of choice if she's donated before, but asking for that. Asking for previous results if the egg donor has been a donor before, asking if there's been previous pregnancies, asking if the donor is willing to be known, or if she's willing to be anonymous, if where you live, anonymity is allowed, and if that's what you're looking for. And then also asking the donor agency, what they do for their money. Do they have on-site or on-staff psychotherapists available to support the donor? The egg donation process is amazing. It's wonderful. Myself, I've been an egg donor. My 3 adult children have been egg donors. And for many donors going through the process, they have reached back and asked us for support. And we have at Egg Helpers a psychotherapist on staff. For us, it's just a non-negotiable. We need to know that our donors, not only at the psychosocial assessment point, but throughout the donation and even after. We've had donors reach back to us and say, hey, I wasn't a mom before I donated, but I'm pregnant with my own child. And I'd love to talk to someone about how I'm going to share this information with my child when the time is right. And our psychotherapist is available to you, once you've been a donor with Egg Helpers or intended parents. Our current team member, Sam, is lovely, and she has had so many meaningful conversations with intended parents around disclosure, when, how, why disclosure matters, how anonymity is really dying with services like 23andMe, Ancestry, DNA, that people are finding each other. And so how do we support ourselves through that process? And so Sam is available for intended parents and donors throughout that timing. And so if anyone has questions about that, please pop them in the chat or feel free to okay, we have a question from Instagram. Okay. They are asking if they choose an egg donor from a database and that donor is listed as anonymous, if it is appropriate to ask the agency if the donor is willing to be known, if they're looking for a known donor. Absolutely. I mean, I think that many donors will say, oh, I'd like to be anonymous, or I'm fine to be anonymous or known. But we've seen many intended parents and donors meet when they had initially thought they would be proceeding in an anonymous egg donation. On to surrogacy service providers. Again, you're going to take yourself with you wherever you proceed with surrogacy. And so I say that because I want to really encourage people to do an inventory of their values and beliefs around the surrogacy process. And that means if you're traveling abroad for surrogacy to locations such as Colombia, Argentina, Ukraine, Georgia, Cyprus, really to look at what is important to you, whether it's the surrogate having legal representation, whether it's you having contact with the surrogate throughout the pregnancy and not through a third party, whether it's you being on video calls for doctor's appointments, whether it's you being able to be in the delivery room when your child is born. I have seen programs completely shift away from the way they do things when clients have brought themselves forward to say, hey, these are my values, these are my beliefs around the way I want to become a parent, and I'd love to work with this destination for my family building. And if I do, I need to know it lines up with my values and is in line with what I'm looking for. And so with that being said, all of those items I listed, really just checking in with yourself, like what's important to me? And maybe none of those are important to you, but if they are, they need to be important to your agency. When you're meeting with an agency, really asking, what are wait times for surrogates? What happens if our surrogate walks away? The what happens if your surrogate walks away is important, because whether agencies want to admit it or not, at CFC, we're very transparent. 20% of matches break before an IVF embryo transfer, and 20% of surrogates in our program right now are not getting pregnant, and intended parents are moving on to other surrogates. And so there is extended timelines for people. And, being the largest agency, being more than 80% of the Canadian surrogacy market, we just have the numbers and we are able to really dissect the data and look at it. And so as we're doing that, we're looking at fertility clinics and we're going, Is this a clinic we want to work with? We're seeing this consistency of unsuccessful attempts. We're seeing these numbers that are just not impressing us. And so asking the agency, will they work with your clinic? If it's a clinic on the moon, you want an agency that's willing to get in there and work with them. And asking your fertility clinic, will you work with my agency? And if they say no, you are going to be doing a lot of legwork for your surrogate. And my suggestion is to find a clinic that is really comfortable with surrogates. As you're talking to surrogacy agencies, ask them, what's your criteria? How do you take surrogates in? Do your surrogates have background checks done? Do they have criminal record checks done? Are they women with children, without children? Really finding out what that intake process looks like to ensure that any surrogate that you work with has been vetted ahead of time. With that being said, life happens. Any good agency will tell you that surrogates walk away, and supporting women as they walk away is the only way that you're able to support them when they come back, because they do come back when life stops lifing and they're able to, or when their job settles, or their sick child recovers, or they've grieved the loss of a parent fully and are able to really participate. Asking your agency, do they have more than 3 staff? Like, are they an actual business? Do they have insurance for the money that they're holding for you? Do they have insurance? Do they have business insurance? Are they incorporated? Are they in good standing with the Better Business Bureau? Do they have enough staff that if COVID hits and half the staff is sick, there is someone to pick up the phone? We're 26 people between Egg Helpers and CFC. And, we have someone who manages travel. We have people that manage the financial aspects of your journey. We have coordinators for the surrogates. We have case specialists for intended parents. Having access to professionals in their own right is so important. And so when you're looking at an agency, there are many agencies that pop up kind of overnight, and there's like 1 or 2 people that work there. And while it's lovely to have a personal touch, my recommendation is to really look and see, have they gone the distance? Have they completed journeys? What is their track record? Can they refer you to clients that can share their experience? And that experience isn't always sunshine and rainbows. I know for us, my favorite recommendations are to the intended parents who have had the hardest go and are out the other side of it. But they did have the hardest go, and they're willing to really show up vulnerably to share that hard experience. Asking the surrogacy agency how they manage supporting everyone. Do they have a therapist on staff that's available to intended parents, surrogates, or the 3 of them together? Do they have the ability to I don't want to say negotiate, but do they have buying power at your clinic? Have they done journeys there before? Do they have personal relationships with clinic staff so that they can pick up the phone and make that phone call on your behalf if you're not getting through to the clinic, if you're not getting supported? Really, really important. And finally, how many babies have come through their program? Have they worked with intended parents in your part of the world? And whether that's an agency in Colombia, Cyprus, Georgia, Canada, asking for those personal references and ensuring that they have a framework to refer people to speak with you as intended parents. And last but not least, the fertility clinic. And over the last, I would say 5 years, things have really shifted in Canada. All but 4 fertility clinics are owned by private equity companies. And so the landscape has changed here, and we are seeing a lot more sales pitches, a lot more guaranteed programs. And I call that the clinic casino, where you go and you pay one price and they guarantee you a baby. If it works, they win because they have 2 times or 2.5 times the money of an IVF cycle. If it doesn't work the first time, the second time, the third time, you've only paid once. And they begin to lose money, I think, at two and a half. Once you've gotten to two and a half transfers, which makes no sense because there can't be a half a transfer, but that's just the way it looked when we, looked at 100 cases. What I will say about guaranteed cycles is if you are at a clinic with great success rates, you don't need one. What I will say about guaranteed cycles is for many people, they have gone through such significant disappointment and trauma and pain that it sounds like a great deal. What I will tell you is that the guarantee doesn't cover anything outside of that clinic. And so if they can't get your surrogate pregnant, sure, they're going to do another IVF cycle for you, but then you're going to have to pay a donor agency fee. You're going to have to reimburse your donor. You're going to have to pay to be rematched for a surrogate. You're going to have to have new legal contracts, and the list goes on and on and on. And so really, really, when you're interviewing a clinic, and listen, please interview these clinics. If they're in the US, they have stats. They report to SART and CDC, so you can see, their numbers. In Canada, we don't have that. In other places in the world, they don't either. They might say, "Oh, our stats are this." Prove it. Is what I'm beginning to say to clinics, because I'm seeing how fudgy, the numbers can be. So as you're looking at a guaranteed cycle versus an independent standalone IVF package, really getting the lowdown on that, like getting really clear on what that is. Will they accept your benefits? Or do you pay and get that money back if you have employer benefits? And if you haven't looked into that, please do. We have a webinar somewhere, Budget versus Reality. We also have one that talks about where to find money for the journey, I think coming up in another week or so. Aaliyah, if you could put the date for that in the chat, if we have that already loaded to go. Can you use your drug plan? Can you, as I said, use your benefits? Do they have stats on their egg donor cycles? If you're just going through, not just, but if you're going through egg donation, do they have stats? How healthy are they keeping donors? What is their ovarian hyperstimulation rate? Are donors getting sick in that clinic? Because I will tell you, there's nothing worse than celebrating, 26 embryos on the back side of someone's painful retrieval process and recovery. And so really finding out, how are they keeping the donor safe? How are they screening surrogates? What is their criteria for surrogates? How do they manage the care of the surrogate, who's the patient really, and the intended parent, who's the payer for the patient? How do they manage that care? What is the surrogate's personal health information versus what information needs to go to intended parents? Really talking to the clinic about that. And I will say, the suggestions, the information about the referral from your family doctor to a fertility clinic may not be the best one. I would really lean into professionals. So as you're talking to a fertility lawyer, wherever it is that you're thinking of engaging, ask them, what do you think the best clinic is? Same with egg donor program, surrogacy program. Where are your surrogates the happiest? Where are your egg donors the happiest? Where are you seeing the best success? Asking those professionals or other people who have had kids through surrogacy, if the agency refers you to someone to chat to, if the lawyer refers you to someone to chat to, ask them, where did you engage? What clinic did you work with? Did you have success? And what did success look like to you? Was success getting pregnant on the first attempt? Or was success more granular in how you were treated by the clinic, how your surrogate and egg donor were treated, how you felt throughout the process? Did you feel like a number? Did you have access to your doctor? Did they call you with results rather than emailing you? We also have a webinar, I think, coming up on navigating the fertility clinic experience. I don't think we have a date for it yet, but please join us for it. It will be really, really helpful as you begin to navigate, how do I engage with the fertility clinic when someone else going through the egg donor process? How do I engage with the fertility clinic when I need to figure out how I can use my benefits and when, even though I'm not the patient, but I am the payer? There are so many sort of nuances and aspects to that I can't wait to share with you because it really is just so important. Finally, asking a fertility clinic, while they don't report their success rates, I think it's important to ask the question anyways, and asking the doctor, what does success look like in this scenario? I want to use my own eggs. I want to use an egg donor with my partner's sperm. Or if I won the lottery today, and this is my always question for a clinic, if I won the lottery today, what would be the fastest way for me to have a child? That answer might be your answer if you are 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 55, and time is of the essence and more valuable than money. So really looking at time versus money. And for some people, they are proceeding in destinations that weren't their first choice, but they proceeded there because there was a surrogate available. There was a guarantee all around. So one price, you get a baby. That includes your surrogate, your donor, your clinic experience. And that makes sense for a lot of people. And I say that because it's just so important that you as intended parents look at, is time most important? Is money most important? Are your values most important? Because listen, you can take your values with you, as I said, finding the right providers in any location. I have yet to see a surrogacy destination say no when money's on the line. Here's what we need. We're paying customers. We're ready to start today. Can you accommodate our requirement for a known donor, contact with our surrogate during, being present at the birth? If that's important to you, then, the other pieces will fall into place in terms of the destination. So, I will leave you with that. And if you have questions, if you want to connect with us, please reach back. Aaliyah's email is in the chat to connect with her to have the link sent for this webinar as well as future webinars. And we look forward to providing you more information in our series of webinars. Thanks very much for joining us,